Hey guys, novocaine here. Today I'm going to show you how to make some simple yet silky smooth animations that fit just about any product. On the surface, this might look like something super easy. However, beginners tend to make some not so obvious mistakes, which in my opinion can make your product renders look 10 times better with the right approach that I'm going to try to go over. Now, this is only scratching the surface of product animation. If you add things like environments or other creative approaches, that's going to separate you from most of the competition and allow you to charge way more. But you can't do that unless you've nailed your foundations. So let's get started. So we're going to be animating this retro Game Boy, these AirPods Max, and these Vans sneakers. You can get all of these models that were made by talented people for free down below and follow along, or you can pick one of your own models and apply whatever I'm doing to those. So if you don't have a model in mind that you want to animate, the first one I'm going to be doing is this original Game Boy. So the first link in the description should lead you to this Sketchfab link. And this model is made by AtTheSpeedOf, and this is a great model. Shout outs to you. If you just click on download 3D model, I would recommend you download either the 1K texture GLB or the 4K, depending on how powerful your computer is. So if you downloaded the GLB file, just go up to File, Import, and GITF 2.0, which supports GLB files. Then just navigate to wherever you have your GLB file saved and double click it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a camera and frame it. So let me just go into my front view by holding the tilde key and going front, or you can press on this green gizmo up here and then Shift A camera. Now we can't see it because it is too far, so we are just going to press G, then Y with the camera selected and move it back. And now if we go to our view camera, you can see that it's still a little bit too close, so I'm going to do GY again and move it further, GZ, move it up a little bit so it's centered, and yeah, that looks good. If we go into material preview, you can see all the textures work fine, so we can start animating. However, if you try to move the Game Boy, you can see that it's actually two different objects, so it's good practice to make an empty and just parent everything you're going to animate to that empty. So just do Shift A, empty, I'm going to do a cube, and then you just want to roughly scale this to your Game Boy. It doesn't have to be exact, this is just for yourself. It's not going to impact it if the empty is off. Now, if you're using Blender 4.1 like me, you can just double click on this and it will select everything. Or if you're on an earlier version, the same way to do this is to just right click and select hierarchy. These will do the same exact thing. And then just shift click on the empty and then press Control P, set parent to object, keep transform. So now let's add this to a separate collection so we have a cleaner outliner. So just press M, new collection, call this Game Boy, and there you go. Now you have a Game Boy collection with a Game Boy empty, and now whenever you rotate this empty or move it around, all of the objects will stick. So I want to do a classic 360 degree Z rotation animation. So make sure you're on frame 1 with the empty selected and just press this button on the rotation Z here, which is going to enable keyframes. And then let's go to frame 120. You can do whatever you like. You can adjust this after, but I'm doing 120 for now. And I'm going to type in 360 here and add another keyframe. And if we play it, I've seen a lot of people just call it a day here. This looks good enough for them, and they don't make any further adjustments, which I think, they're really missing out. So let's make the motion a little bit more interesting. So let me pull this up, click this button and change it to the graph editor and select the empty. Now let me do tilde key, frame all, and you can see we have a Bezier curve here with two handles. So if you've never touched the graph editor, it's actually very simple. You can just drag these handles here, which is what they're called, with G, and just move them around. And basically this curve indicates how fast the motion is going to happen, or rather the velocity of it. So if I do this, it would have a very, very fast animation at the start, and then it would slow down all the way to frame 120. This is probably one of my most used Bezier motions. Is I take the second handle and press GX, and I'm going to move it pretty far down to the left, and it's going to give the animation that little oomph on the start, and then it's going to mellow out towards the end, and it looks way more professional than what you had before. Now this looks better, but I'm actually going to angle it a little bit so it's not as flat. So I'm going to take my rotation X value here with the empty selected, and I'm going to turn it down about like 10 degrees so it's at a slight angle and just looks more interesting, I guess. So once you're happy with your animation, just go here. Let's go back into our timeline and let me select the end to be the duration of our animation. So let's quickly add a backdrop so the background isn't completely transparent. So let me just go into here, Shift A, plane. Let's drag this down, scale it up a little bit. Something like that, maybe just slightly bigger. Let's go into edit mode with tab. Select this edge here by selecting this or pressing 2. Press E to extrude and then Z to lock it to the Z axis. Then select this edge here, press Ctrl B, drag your mouse up, and then drag your mouse wheel up a bunch of times, like 6 or 7, just so you get that smooth sort of edge here. And then press right click, shade smooth to get rid of those lines there. Now if we go back into our camera, we can actually see the backdrop is too small, so we're just gonna scale it up, maybe put it down a little bit, and just make sure you can't see any of the transparent edges. So now if we go into cycles, everything's gonna be dark. That's fine. We're gonna be using an HDRI for this, so just press this button here, untick scene world, and I'm gonna select this one, city EXR. But if you try to render this, render image, is going to be dark, so we have to set it up for our world as well. So this is actually pretty easy. You just go into your world tab, change your color to environment texture, press open, and then navigate to your folder where your HDRIs are, or you can use your own HDRI. Here's CDXR. Now we can enable our scene world back, and if we render, boom. Couple last things and then we're done with this. I'm going to make a new window here. Zoom in on my rendered view, go outside of camera, and we're gonna add one light because it's a little too dark. I'm just gonna add an area light, scale it up, G, Shift Z to move it along these coordinates, make it go up a little bit, press Shift T, and now you can angle the light onto your object. Let's go into our light settings, let's change the power to like 50 to give it a little bit more light, maybe even more, like 100. Of course, this is a super primitive light. You could look up 3-point light tutorials. They're pretty easy. So here's another thing that a lot of people usually forget about. If you go into your render settings here, enable motion blur. It's gonna make things look way more organic. The shutter value is how much motion blur is going to be in your render. I think 0.50 is sometimes too much, actually most of the time. I like a value of 0.35. And for our noise threshold in our render tab, I'm going to do a fairly low value, something like 0.02, 0.05. And max samples, you definitely don't need 4,000 of them. 128 will be more than enough. And make sure denoise is checked. Select your output. So make a folder wherever you want to save these frames. I'm going to call mine gameboy for obvious reasons. Except we're going to do JPEG, quality 100. And yeah, now you can just go up to render and render animation. And once you have all these frames rendered out, you're all done in Blender. If you don't know how to turn these frames into an actual video, stick around. I'll show you how to do that at the very end. The second model we're going to be animating are these AirPods Max, which you can download from the second link in the description. You can get this model for free as long as you make an account on the cgaxis website. And I'm going to be downloading the Blender file this time because it's going to save us some time so we don't have to apply the materials manually with FBX or OBJ. So you're going to have to export a zip file, put it wherever you want, and in that zip file you should have a .blend file and you can just open it from Blender. By default, it's just going to open in the shading tab, but we're going to go into layout. So first of all, let's just go in here into our render engine and let's switch to cycles and enable GPU. I'm going to make a camera just like the last one. I'm going to go into my front view, deselect everything, Shift A, camera, and let's move back, GY, move it up a little bit. Let's move it a little bit closer, something like that. So here they've actually done the empty for us. It's just this empty axis, and if you select it, you can move it around and all the objects will follow along. But I want my empty to actually be in the middle. For me, it makes more sense. So the way to do it is very simple. You select everything just like we did for the Game Boy, but deselect the empty by clicking Control and on the empty in your outliner. And then you can move everything down with G and Z to lock it to the Z axis, and then you have an empty in the middle of your object. But for this one, we're actually going to animate 2 headphones like you saw in the start. So I'm going to position this one more towards the right, press R twice, and now you can freely rotate it into whatever angle with your mouse. And I'm going to move them a little closer by pressing G and then Shift Z, so you can move them closer without moving them up or down. I'm actually going to rotate them on the Y axis as well to make it a little bit more interesting, and maybe to the left a little bit. So now let's duplicate these. If you're on 4.1, you can just double click on this. If you're not, just select hierarchy and then press Shift D, Shift Z to move them to the left side. And we're going to position these like this, sort of facing each other toward the middle, and it gives us a nice composition. And we're going to do the same 120 frames, so just input that here. Let's pull it up, and the idea of this, they're just going to be slowly rotating on their own axis, and the depth of field is going to switch from these headphones to these. So let's do these ones first. So select the empty, and if you're on Blender 4.1, the shortcut is K. If you're on Blender 4.0 or before, the shortcut is I. I'm on 4.1, I'm going to press K, and then we're going to insert a rotation keyframe. Then let's go to frame 120, press R twice again, and we're going to angle them something like that maybe, and then press K again or I and insert a rotation keyframe, and now they're going to be rotating like this. Let's do the same for the other pair. Select the empty, K, rotation. Actually, I'm going to set the first frame that we did as our last frame. So at the end, it's going to look like this, but it's going to start out with a rotation that maybe facing away. I don't know. How does that look? I think that looks good enough, but you can play around with it, you know, try out different rotations. I'm not saying there's a correct or wrong way to do this. So again, we're going to go into our graph curve, our graph editor actually. Press the tilde key, frame all, and we can see that we are rotating all 3 Eulers or Eulers. I don't know how you pronounce that.
Euler.
So you can see there's already some easing by default on Blender. Just select all of these handles on the right side and move them towards the very start, and move these to the right so that it's very like linear. And there you go. Now they sort of look like they're floating in space. You can adjust the speed of them if you want them to go slower. You could just extend this further out, and then don't forget to change this as well. But I think this is good enough. So now let's actually do the depth of field animation, which is a lot of fun. Shift right click on the edge of this headphone or whatever you want to have in focus, and press Shift A and add a plane axis. Scale it down like so. This is going to be our depth of field. Just call it DOF. Then select your camera, go into your camera settings, enable depth of field, and the focus object is going to be our depth of field empty. So if we go into cycles, let me disable scene world, you can see that this is the only place in focus. Now there's way too much depth of field going on, so I'm going to increase the f-stop to about like 6 or something. Yeah, 6 looks fine. And now we're going to animate the position of our empty. So let's go to frame 1, select it, press K or I, insert location, and then let's go to about like frame 90. Let's go outside of our camera view in cycles, and G, Shift Z, and move this to wherever you want the second focus point to be. So I'm going to do maybe like in the middle, and then add another location keyframe. I'm actually going to move these two a little further, move this one back, so when the scene starts, it has some time where the first pair of headphones are still in focus. And for our depth of field empty, we're actually going to play around with the graph curves as well. So here's a pro tip: you can switch to the graph editor from timeline with Control Tab, frame all, and here you can see the curves of the empty. So we're gonna do a curve that looks something like this. Don't go too much if you're following along with exactly what I'm doing, because you know the headphones are kind of moving slow and you don't want the depth of field to be insanely fast, you know, something like that. Actually, we're going to just bring these a little along so it's not as abrupt as it was before. So this is what my final curve looks like. They're sort of meeting towards the left side. Yet again, let's do a backdrop so the background isn't completely transparent. Same thing, add a plane. Let's move it down here. Grab this edge, extrude it up. Grab this, bevel, shade smooth. Maybe we can move this up a little bit to increase the gradient look. Yeah, this looks pretty cool. Maybe we could actually change it to black, increase my roughness, and lower my specular. I might go with like a gray. A gray could be cool. As far as the lights go, I'm just gonna use a Studio HDRI because these headphones, they have a lot of metallic parts. And you know, when you're using an HDRI like this, a lot of the lights are gonna be, you know, they're gonna look cool. They're gonna reflect off all these metallic places and it's gonna look really sleek. So same thing, let me go into my world settings here, color, environment texture, open, go to my HDRIs, and let me try this one. Make sure you have your scene world enabled. So here the backdrop is actually giving us too much of a gradient, so I'm just gonna move it down like so. And yeah, that looks pretty cool. We could actually lower the depth of field just a little bit. I mean, increase the f-stop to maybe about like 8. So yeah, actually this project file has noise threshold and denoise disabled. So let me just enable those. Noise threshold we can leave at 0.02, and denoise, yeah, we can use GPU as well. As far as lights go, I don't think I'm going to touch them in this project file. I think the HDRI is good enough. Of course, you know, you could play around with lights, do this, do that, but if I did lights for every single one of these project files, this tutorial would be, you know, twice as long. And now that we're ready to render, yeah, our noise threshold at 0.02, denoise enabled. I don't think we need motion blur for this. There's not like any sudden movements where you could see it that much, so we would just be losing render time. And yeah, 1920, 1080, I think that's good enough. So yeah, the third free model that I'm gonna use is this Vans old school photo scanned model by Lassi Kaukonen. That's my best Finnish accent impression. I'm guessing this guy's Finnish. Yeah, just click on download 3D model. We're gonna go for GLB, and I'm gonna go for 4K. I'm sure you know how to import GLB files by now, so I'm not gonna bother with it. So yeah, let's just go to our front view, camera, same thing. GY, the shoe is crazy big. Let's scale it down and rotate it on the z-axis about 90 degrees. Let's go into our camera view, moving it around with G. I think I could move it closer to the shoe a little bit. So yeah, let me position it toward the bottom of the screen and center it. I think that's center. There is a nice tool you can use in camera viewport display, composition guides. You can actually enable center or thirds, you know, and try to match it roughly. I use that sometimes. So yeah, let's add an empty. All right, that looks good enough. The shoe is only one model, I believe, but just in case, let me select all of it. Shift click the empty, Control P, object, keep transform, everything works. So we're going to insert a location and rotation keyframe on frame 0 or 1, whatever. And let's go to frame 90, I don't know. And let's move it up. And let's rotate it on the x-axis, not quite 90 degrees, more like 87-ish. You can see right there. And insert a location and keyframe. Location and rotation keyframe, my bad. Now let's go back into our graph editor. Frame all with tilde key like we've been doing. Yup, okay. And we can take these handles on the right side. It's like these ones, maybe something like this. So we're going for a somewhat aggressive curve. This one's in the middle. This one's more toward the left. No, I could be faster than that. We could do something like this. Let's take this a little less. You know, the best way to get good, natural looking graph curves is to just use it a lot. You know, I can't teach you that. It's something that comes with practice, but I hope I've given you the blueprint. I hope I've given you, you know, somewhere to start from. So let's go back to our timeline, and I'm actually going to move the first keyframe forward a little bit, like 10 frames. So yeah, let's animate the camera to go with it. So let's go to frame 10. Insert a keyframe here, just location, then go to frame 90, G and Z to move it up. Let's center this nicely. So, but now you can see that the camera is sort of lagging behind because we haven't done anything to the curves of the, you know, Z location of the camera. So you can hide the Y and X location of the camera in your graph editor, frame all, and just try to mimic the exact curve of the empty to the camera. So we can see that the curve here is pretty hard, something like that, and the one on the bottom is slightly out towards the middle, something like that. And now you have a matched curve. So yeah, I like this, but now it looks kind of flat, I guess, with the shoe being like almost head on. So I'm going to go to frame 90, or my second keyframe, and I'm just going to rotate this around, maybe something like this. This could be pretty cool. And then don't forget to replace the location and rotation, otherwise it will reset once you go away from frame 90. So now it looks something like this. Right, so let's make the backdrop. Let me open up another window here. Camera view, hide this with T. Hide this with T as well, we don't really need it. Make a plane, same thing. Place it below because we're gonna have a platform where the shoe is resting on in just a moment. Scale it up, select that edge, extrude it, grab this one, bevel, scroll, shade smooth, we're done. Position it, or scale it on X rather. There you go. Now let's add the platform. So let me just make a cube. I'll go into wireframe mode here, just to match the shoes dimensions to an extent. Move it up just a little bit more. You can hold shift for a more precise selection. And let's actually make the platform a different material, or, you know, a different color. So I went for sort of a pastel beige tone. I didn't want to go for green. And yeah, I think that's all for the animation. So our animation stops at frame 90. Set that here. As far as our render settings go, a noise threshold 0.03, max samples 128, and we can do motion blur for this one as well. We're gonna do 0.35. So I did two really quick things. I changed the backdrop color to this sort of orange, complements both the beige platform, and I think these two colors go pretty nicely together. And I also added this top light here, so when the shoe goes up, the top of it is illuminated. It's definitely not something that is super necessary, but you can see it right here. I think the light on the top to make those edges pop is a nice plus. And for the HDRI, if you're wondering, I'm going to use the forest.exr. So again, same setup, world, color, environment, open, wherever this is, forest EXR. And yeah, now if I render, everything should look good. I'm just going to quickly go over post-production, which is something that you should definitely not skip if you haven't done much of. I think the two best options for this are Resolve, which is free, and After Effects, which I prefer. To do it in Resolve, go to your Media tab, click on these three dots, Frame Display Mode, do Sequence, go to File, Import Media, go to where you exported everything, press Ctrl A, just select all, open, and now if you go into Edit, you can drag your video in here, and it should play. And now you can do color correction effects. So here's how to do it in After Effects. Right click in your project bin, import file, navigate, select the first one, and then check importer JPEG sequence. Then right click, you comp from selection. I'm going to right click on the comp, composition settings, set this to 24. So I tend to use Lumetri Color a lot, which is the color correction plugin. It comes with every After Effects. For example, I think this could use some more shadows, so I'm gonna drag this down a little bit. You don't need to be a genius. You can just go left, right, see what looks good, go with your gut. And I also like to use grain, set the viewing mode to final output. And grain just adds a little bit of life. I usually change the color to monochromatic because I don't like colored grain. I'm gonna lower my softness to like 0.5. You don't need anything, you know, super grainy for product renders. You're not shooting a short film on 8mm. So yeah, like this video if it helped. It really helps me if you do. I hope this gave you some sort of insight into product animation or helped you improve the quality of your product renders. Try out different camera angles, experiment with different animations, lights. I have 2 more videos on my channel which you could find useful. One of them is a more advanced product animation tutorial where you can have this cool ring go around your product, or this desert environment one which you could use to place your product in. Check out my Instagram, I post my work there. Check out my Twitter. Reach out if you need any help. Peace out.